So it's my great pleasure to introduce Clay Bavor. So Clay he's a vice president at Google, and he's led some semi-obscure products that you may have heard of, like Gmail and Google Drive. And he's also passionate about virtual reality, and that's his latest thing. He's the head of virtual reality at Google, and he's going to tell you about his view on virtual reality and some of the things that Google's doing. So it's really awesome to have him here. It's also cool that we have a jump camera. So this is a Google jump camera. Clay's going to tell you more about it. This one's produced by GoPro. It's called their Odyssey camera. And I think this is the first time that a talk has been recorded in Stereo 360, certainly with Google Jump, so kind of a milestone. Cool.
Nice. Thanks for having me. Thank you. First of all, very important note about the jump camera. It films in 360, so that means like it can see you, which means if you like pick your nose or do something else, fall asleep, every future viewer will be able to know. Yeah, so we can actually all say hello to our future viewer. Hi, future viewer.
Hello.
Glad to have you here. Welcome to class. What classroom are we in?
Thompson Hall 101.
Okay, and there was just a real live bell that you missed because you weren't recording then. But anyway, so welcome to Thompson Hall. So thank you for the introduction.
Yeah.
And it's pretty exciting for us to have this booting up. We've been working on it for really over 18 months and really intensely for the last 12 months. And Steve has led an amazing team at Google working on the software that takes kind of these 16 viewpoints and turns it into omnidirectional stereoscopic video, which basically means you need to kind of synthesize 10,000 novel viewpoints all around the circumference of the camera array, do some other fancy things. And so, as Steve said, this is one of the very first cameras off of GoPro's lines, and we hope to have many thousands of these out in the world, capturing all of the kind of most interesting, important things. So, rather than tell you about here are Google products and here's the history of Google Cardboard and so on, I'll touch on some of that, but you can learn about that stuff on the internet and using Google and so on. I thought I'd just share a brain download of how I think about VR, why it is interesting and important, a bit about why it's happening now, how to think about it, and I think importantly where it goes from here, because it's going to do weird things for these three things, and much more than this, but just three kind of narrow windows of the human experience I wanted to describe. How they're going to change as a result of virtual reality's kind of rollout to the world. One last thing, good job being in this class. Good job being in this class. It's very clear to me that VR after VR, augmented reality, it's the future and potentially the final phase of computing, right? Where you have a technology which can synthesize anything either real or imagined, put you anywhere, or in augmented reality's case, bring anything that you can imagine to you, whether it's something as straightforward as another black rectangle computing canvas, or overlaying data, from my footprints on the floor to take me back to Steve's office, or Bob sitting in the chair here as kind of a volumetric light field representation of him. That stuff all happened in inside 10 years, and it's cool that is this the first VR AR class that you know of? So that's sweet. So good job being in the first VR AR class. You've seen the future ahead of most other people. I wish I had access to a class like this. Well, I guess the technology didn't really exist 10 years ago, but it's pretty cool. So who has been in one of the HTC Vives or the Oculus Rift, a high-end VR system? Okay, so almost everyone. So there are a handful of people who haven't. And for you, there truly is no substitute to actually experiencing this thing directly. And I cannot count the number of times someone has come to our labs at Google, said, I don't know about this VR thing, I'm kind of skeptical. And within 90 seconds in one of the VR demo rooms we have, oh my God, this is, okay, I get it, I was a skeptic, I'm a convert, I get it. The best way I found to describe what happens in that kind of demo room to someone who's not actually in that demo room is actually by sharing one of the first things we show most people. And we call it the diving board. And it's a virtual experience. You put on the goggles. It works best in like the HTC Vive, where you can kind of move about freely within a relatively large space. And you start by this kind of abstract but very pleasant looking swimming pool. You're like, oh, there's a swimming pool, okay. And then you look to your right and you're like, oh, okay, there are some diving boards. There are actually many diving boards. Okay, so there's a small dive, medium dive, a high dive, and then you look up and you're like, oh shit. And so you know where this is going, right? So we're like, okay, and we check, you're afraid of heights, and it's funny what people say. Anyway, enough said. So for people say, no, I'm okay. We put them up here. You put them up here. This is 450 feet up in the air, 150 meters, and one of the things we do that's important is we have a pair of oversized Crocs that we've taped the Vive controllers to, so you can actually see your feet as you're stepping out on the diving board. It turns out that makes it more realistic. Now, what happens is amazing here. So people, as soon as they're teleported here, they lower their center of gravity, right? They duck down. Just a few steps behind, there's a railing, and people will reach for the railing and find, well, there isn't a railing. Okay, well, what's with that? What? Well, we've evolved for millions of years, first as reptiles, then as small mammals, then as apes, most recently as humans did. When we find ourselves on a cliff face, our brain goes, oh shit, and does the right thing, right? Lower our center of mass, try and stabilize our body, and so on. And then we say, okay, can you walk to the end of the diving board, and can you step off? And now, some of you may be, simulating this in your mind. You're like, oh my god. More than half of the people we put in this simulation can't step off the diving board. They can't do it. So what is going on? What is going on? And again, for those of you who've been in these demo rooms, hopefully, right, this sounds familiar. You're like, yeah, it's like you're there. It's like you're actually there, experiencing it directly. And these physical cues, these physical responses that you don't think about, that are below your conscious level of thought, right, says that VR is doing something to your brain that other things, televisions and so on, might not be. And in the jargon, you will have heard this word, presence. It is now the buzzword du jour in VR. It means, as I think about it, it's like your brain says, yep, I'm there, I'm somewhere else. I'm somewhere else. And what's interesting is, we have this perception of just directly perceiving reality, right? It's just like reality comes in, colors and shapes and stuff just come in, and then we just kind of know about them. But in fact, like, our perception of reality, our senses don't exist anywhere but in our sense of consciousness, right? We're not perceiving an experience directly. Instead, our bodies are integrating senses. Our vestibular system, the orientation of your head, proprioception, the orientation of your body, vision, sound, touch, smell, taste, and so on, and basically hallucinating this experience of, well, I'm here, I'm in a room, when really all that's out there is like matter and energy, right? Like red doesn't exist, textures don't exist, it only exists in our minds. And kind of the best way I've heard this put is by this cool guy, David Eagleman. Everything you experience, every sight, sound, smell, rather than being a direct experience, is an electrochemical rendition in a dark theater. So the interesting thing about this and virtual reality is really all virtual reality needs to do, and it's a tall task, it's hard, but all it needs to do is give your brain just enough cues through just enough senses in a way that is just consistent enough with the way your brain normally takes in its different senses and integrates those into a sense of presence and consciousness and so on. That's all you need to do to have this sense of, oh my God, I'm there. And that is the power of the power and potential for VR. There's a weird corollary here, which I need to point out. If you think about your different senses, and you think about your sense of consciousness, you have one sense of consciousness, right? Everything is integrated into the present moment. But it turns out that our visual cortex is about 30 milliseconds slower than our audio cortex. We, at a subconscious level, are able to process audio about 30 milliseconds faster. It's actually one of the reasons why sprinting races are started with gunshot as opposed to a flashing light, right? And they've actually done experiments, and if you just show sprinters a flashing light, it takes them 160 milliseconds to get off the block. If you fire a gun, it takes 130 milliseconds to get off the block. And even more weirdly, if you think about the time it takes for a sensation from your toe to get to your brain versus a sensation from your ears to get to your brain, there's actually a big time delay there. Okay, so what's happening? The theory is actually our brain is waiting for the slowest sense to arrive before it creates an aligned sense of consciousness, taking all of the kind of time slices of senses and making one of them. Okay. Now, if your toe takes 100 milliseconds or 80 milliseconds to get to your brain, the corollary of this is this. Awareness is post-dictive, incorporating data from a window of time after an event and delivering a retrospective interpretation of what happened. The translation of this is we're living actually in the past. Very strange, right? Like everything that you experience that is happening right at this instant actually is about 100 milliseconds old, right? Which in terms of the number of like video frames is actually quite a lot of video frames. So kind of strange. The other weird corollary is it is possible that very tall people actually live more in the past than short people. Right? Think about it. So I've been interested in like, so I wonder if like fighter jet pilots tend to be like pretty short, like compact people, because their brain only has to operate at like a 75 millisecond delay. Don't know. Anyway, so again, the promise of VR is its ability to drive your senses in exactly the way that reality drives them, at least insofar as your different senses align and agree with one another. And what we found is things don't need to look photorealistic, right? They don't. They just need to move about in the same way they'd move about if you were actually moving your body through an environment. And interestingly, also, your senses, your kind of consciousness integrator, is somewhat flexible in when these things arrive. So in VR, there's a lot of talk about latency, and the importance of latency. And 20 milliseconds has become this kind of goal for the amount of latency you want that or below between when you move your head and when the pictures on the display actually reflect your movement. Well, 20 milliseconds is a lot longer than 0 milliseconds, which is our kind of normal delay. So there's actually some flexibility in this like sense integrator. So what's with VR happening now? Like, why is it happening now as opposed to 10 years ago or 10 years into the future? And it's pretty straightforward. Which there are three things that came together in really just the last 4 years to make it possible. First is, again, going back to this, what does it take to create a realistic sense of presence, of I'm there, and by that I really just mean a visual experience, an audio experience that aligns with the vestibular system, proprioception, and so on. Well, you need to know what your body's doing in order to tell a computer where to move virtual cameras in space so that you can get images that actually correspond to your movement in an environment. And thanks to mobile phones, actually things like IMUs and accelerometers and other things that measure the orientation of a device, cameras that can be used with computer vision techniques to understand the kind of absolute position of a headset within space. All of this stuff has been driven down in cost over the last 10 years, and in particular the last 5 with the rise of mobile. And so we finally had sensors that were cheap enough and good enough to actually give us an accurate read on your head pose, where you could feed that into a computer, get the right images out. Second part is, it turns out we have ridiculously good vision. Just ridiculously good vision. If you do the math and you wanted to fill 220 degrees field of view, and by the way, the human field of view can extend well beyond that depending on your bone structure, haircut, and so on. It is funny thinking about like how your BMI and a particular haircut in the moment would affect your ability to detect lions and tigers in your peripheral vision. But in any case, if you do the math for something like a 200-degree field of view, you need a 20K by 10K display. Right? So almost 200 megapixels to fill. And by the way, that's one eye, right? So you need that twice. And today's displays are way off, but again, driven by mobile phones, you have just high enough pixel density that you can fill about 100 degrees field of view, which is kind of the minimum you need for a sense of like, okay, I'm kind of convinced I'm on the diving board. We'll talk a bit more about where this goes, but cell phone displays, so cell phone sensors, cell phone displays, and then it turns out we see at much higher than 30 frames per second or 60 frames per second. So if you're rendering images and actually displaying those out to a VR headset, you need to be north of 90, 120, we believe somewhere between 120 and 150 frames per second. Basically everyone stops seeing any sort of flicker or judder or other kind of visual artifacts. So you need a whole lot of GPU horsepower to drive the pixels for even the more modest resolution cell phone display at sufficiently high frame rate. And by the way, you need to render both eyes twice. All this is coming together, and these kind of three curves have aligned really in just the past 3 years. And it's not a coincidence that we're having the HTC Vive, the Oculus Rift, cell phones that you can turn into VR headsets, and the PlayStation VR, all landing, in historical terms at exactly the same instant. Right? And it's a product of these three curves more than anything coming together. And then just a couple real visionaries who called it early. Palmer Luckey deserves massive credit for assembling these parts in the correct configuration first and seeing it first. And that first Rift developer kit was more than anything the seed crystal that once the initial conditions were there caused what's happening today to happen. So you've got presence, the sense of I'm there, you've got technology to enable it. The stuff that's going to come out of it is, even in the short term, I think pretty important and profound from the perspective of how we think about and consume information and how we interact with computing. And computing, I mean computing as in interacting with a computer, mouse and keyboard, or anything that allows us to interact with, manipulate, and benefit from information and a machine acting on it. And I think in historical context, the difference, it used to be if you wanted information about something, you could, long ago you would just read a book or listen to a phonograph or something. In more modern days, you would kind of watch a description of a scene on a TV. And basically it was a cue for your brain to simulate what was happening there. Hey, this is kind of what it would be like on the moon or in orbit, or this is what the hurricane is like. And again, it's kind of watching this flat description of reality through this window. But our brains are pretty good at simulating. That's why we find novels interesting and stories around a campfire interesting. This is quite a few steps further than that. And more recently, you've had HDTVs and so on. There's okay, no, it feels more vivid, it feels more real. But what VR will do with information is just rather than description of high resolution description of being that guy, you'll just be in the astronaut suit or in any other experience, either real or imagined synthetic. And just thinking about the implications of this, and I often think about it through the lens of Google. And our original mission at Google was organizing the world's information, making it universally accessible and useful. We did that first through crawling the web, later through driving cars all around the world to generate maps and Street View, later with YouTube, where we've enabled people to aggregate both kind of entertainment, but also just video information, right? One of the most popular categories on YouTube is how to change a spark plug in your car. And instead of reading a manual that's first, find the manifold. And you're what? What is a manifold? It's just a person, here's a manifold, that's right here, and so on. We finally, with virtual reality, have this tool to organize the world's kind of experiential information. I think that's enormously important and powerful. Think about the difference between seeing a documentary, watching Planet Earth, and going on safari in Kruger National Park, or seeing a really great, one of those videos on the airplanes, Paris, city of wonder, it's great, and takes you around the city. The difference between that video and actually being there, it's night and day. And it's hard to fully extrapolate all the implications for what this technology will mean for experience and taking in information in the richest way possible. But I think it's going to be profound. and more on where that goes. The other angle of this is, suddenly when you're experiencing computing directly, VR is after all a computer using information to generate images and so on. You can interact with it you can interact with the computing objects in exactly the same way you do with stuff in the real world. So, 10 years ago you used kind of a mouse which would manipulate a cursor on a plane, which you would then use to manipulate a representation of a piece of paper on a surface, a display surface, and you move it. More recently, we've had these awesome things where you're basically representing these kind of planes on a surface and can manipulate it more directly. With VR, it's just like you just reach out and you just you grab the object, you move the object, and so on. And I think the possibilities for not only reducing the kind of barriers and distance between us and computers and how we talk to them, but also enabling some pretty new, compelling things are pretty profound. And we've actually at Google started dabbling in what happens if you can just manipulate kind of matter, objects, and so on very directly in front of you with something we call Tilt Brush. Has anyone used Tilt Brush? Wow, this is the highest density usage of Tilt Brush anywhere. Okay, thank you. For me, it was one of the first things I saw in VR where I totally got this other side of it, which is the expressive input, talking to the computer as opposed to passively experiencing something. And I think for many people it's the first, okay, now I see it. I thought this was about games or entertainment. I see where this is going to go. And actually what I'd love to do is just show you a short video. So we just released Tilt Brush on the Vive, and leading up to that we had a number of artists come in and work as part of what we call the Cultural Institute at Google. And what they do there is digitize the world's great works of art, sculptures, paintings, and so on, have a bunch of relationships with artists. And they brought some of those artists in and asked them to do great things with Tilt Brush, and this is what came out of it.
Tilt Brush is a virtual reality application. You can paint in front of you, on the side, behind you, and create amazing artwork in 3D.
What I really like to do is take a subject and kind of tear it apart and break it up into kind of a collage of different styles and textures. To all of a sudden be able to take a brush stroke and whip it over your head and then whip another one around it. It's amazing.
The piece I'm creating today is allegorical. What really struck me was the ability that this has to be a platform for installation in museum and gallery spaces.
Got a series of calligraphic and more abstract line works, like a 2D image, you take it into virtual reality and you're basically sculpting your drawing.
Parte de mi trabajo tiene que ver con la caligrafía. Básicamente tenía una idea que quería hacer, pero ya cuando entras al espacio virtual, en ese momento empieza a cambiar todo.
It's a new platform, it's a first. There's so many things you can do with it. Definitely going to revolutionise how people view immersive artworks.
It's the kind of thing a lot of artists daydream about, but it's never something you would imagine to be real.
My favorite goals in Google Calendar. Run, do yoga. Should we learn about that? No, I don't think so. My favorite one is the first one. Whoa, you whip a brush over your head and then do a spiral. Were you using Tilt Brush with something else? We've actually joked that, so one of the first brushes you get is like this painting with blue light. There's also painting with psychedelic rainbows. And so we thought we could, ship Tilt Brush in a box with a couple other things. You can paint the Pink Floyd CD, and you can imagine the rest. That was Tilt Brush. So it's pretty crazy to extrapolate where things go from here, and just one measurement of like the first derivative of technical progress in and around VR. 18 months ago, just 18 months ago, there were probably half a dozen places in the world, the entire world, where you could go and have the diving board experience I described to you. Not the diving board in particular, but a large-scale, presence-inducing, oh my goodness, like I am being transported experience. 18 months ago. Fast forward 18 months, and there are now consumer products that enable that experience shipping out in the tens, hundreds of thousands. And okay, so if you just plot those two on whatever dimension you want for the y-axis, and you extrapolate there, some pretty profound things happen. But just so again, context. So right now, this is how many pixels you have per degree in a state-of-the-art VR headset. About 10 pixels per degree. No, this is technically not quite right. The displays used in most headsets today are actually Pental matrix, not RGB stripe. But it's easier to count, 10 across when you have stripes. So, it turns out that if you look at an eye chart, right, and what today's resolution represents. So just to orient you, so actually one below this would be 7. But this is not to scale, so if you can see all of these, you don't have Superman vision. It's just bigger than an actual eye chart. So 20/20 vision would be one row below this. But so at the top, 2200, and what that means is when you are 20 feet away from something, you have the same visual acuity as a person with normal vision would at 200 feet. Right? So your vision is not good. You're legally blind. At 2070, the TO0, 2070, you are unfit to drive, right, without corrective eyewear. So, so today's HMDs sit somewhere, in between unfit to drive and legally blind, right? So that's just how far off we are in terms of resolution. But you can draw the display curves. Again, look at the first iPhone versus one of Samsung's newest phones, which has almost 3 megapixels on a display that size. And you extrapolate the curves, and it's a while before we run into kind of the physical constraints of matter. We know that because using a different process, using CMOS, you're able to get micro displays with equivalent resolution that are about the size of a postage stamp. We don't know how to use that same process and map it to larger scale displays that would be suitable for VR, but we think we'll get there. And by the way, we all look at today's VR headsets, and they're not exactly fashionable, but there's also progress being made on the optics side. Pixels and pixel density is one side of it. You also need to take those pixels and then project them out into an image plane that's at a, as opposed to being at optical 2 inches, at optical 2.5 meters or whatever. And so, inside 10 years, we may not be that far off from a form factor that looks something like this. And now these are a little bit transparent at the bottom, but I think fundamentally the form factor, this kind of form factor, we don't know how to do it today, but you can tell yourself a story certainly about the display side, and there's some hints of how to get there on the optics side to get to something that looks like this that would give you that experience of, well, okay, I'm somewhere else. I'm on the diving board or whatever. On the capture side, this is the best VR camera that exists in the world today, at least that we know of. And what's interesting about it, and I'll just take a slight detour here on Jump. It's one of the things I'm most proud of that we've done at Google. The camera design is actually very simple. Right? These are off-the-shelf GoPros. You could literally walk to a store, buy a bunch of GoPros, 3D print the base there, and get some semblance of this device here. What's added in the full production rig, there's an inner ring of equipment that synchronizes all of the cameras so that the pixels are scanned off of the sensors at the same rate, and that gives you better alignment and correspondence between different images. But what's so powerful about this device is it's simple, right? It's simple. There are no exotic optics, there are no custom sensors. It is just 16 cameras in an array. But the challenge is, okay, well, if you want in VR to be able to look all around you and have correct stereoscopic vision, Well, you really need cameras like right here, and 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 you actually just like run out of space-time to get as many cameras in that volume that you need. And so conceptually what you need to do is hallucinate to synthesize all of those in-between cameras. And that's the core of the JUMP pipeline, where we take 16 viewpoints and turn it into, call it tens of thousands, which we then use parts of to synthesize the final imagery from. And as a result, you get stitch-free, right? There's no stitching going on. And in fact, bizarrely, no pixels in the final imagery that's outputted from it are actually directly from one of the cameras, right? So it's not like you're assembling little bits and pieces with an X-Acto knife and lining them up just right. You're actually synthesizing the imagery from it. And the results are pretty incredible. I would love to show you just one compilation of some of the imagery we got. Was it too loud? Was it okay?
It'll blow up cameras.
How do I turn it down? Let's see. Aux, program volume, down, 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 down. Now it's going to be too quiet. We'll just oscillate between them. I can't hear it. I'm hurting my ears. Okay. So this is just a highlights reel. From actually a pre even this prototype camera that we took out into the wild. This very wide aspect ratio. Turns out when you unwrap a 360-degree panorama, it's a bit more than 60 by 9. But just to give you an idea for the diversity of scenes we're able to capture, near stuff, far stuff, moving stuff, still camera, moving camera, it's pretty amazing. So one of the things we were proud of. By the way, when that first ran at Google I/O a year ago, the reason the aspect ratio is so crazy, we had screens that were wrapped around the audience about 270 degrees, and so we wanted to make use of all that screen real estate. So one of the things we were proudest of, and again, this speaks to the importance of not X-Acto knife, recombining little bits and pieces, stitching, but actually synthesizing just the correct imagery. If you put on an HMD and look at some of this video, and you look at like ripples in the water, right, reflections, specular highlights, all of this complexity in it, it's correct. Like you can where are the errors, where are the stitches? You can't find it, and it's a tremendous accomplishment by Steve and his team, and it's so exciting. We'll have these rolling out in volume just in the next couple of weeks. So where this goes is something like this. Not to John Travolta 1970s dance party, but in time you're going to have a camera that looks and is about the same size as like a disco ball. And what's going to happen is there's going to be a really sweet event, a sporting event, the Olympics, your wedding, whatever, and you're going to have one of these disco balls. You're going to hit record, and it's going to let you step back inside that experience. Not only like this camera does and kind of look around within it, but actually be able to move around to some extent within it and have a perceptually accurate experience of that place. And if you think about kind of the limit, what happens, like where does this asymptote, where do displays asymptote? The perfect camera, or the perfect camera disco ball would sample every single, would collect and record every single incoming photon, right, on the outer surface of that sphere, all directions, right, all intensities, all colors. And then imagine the display could perfectly re-emit those same photons on the other side, right, with directionality and so on. functionally, you have something that is equivalent of being there, right? If you measured the photons hitting your retina, they would be the same. Directionality, intensity, everything. Now, unfortunately, analog signals are infinitely expensive to sample. Photons are at least discrete, but it is going to be a while before we get to the perfect capture. But even if you sample it and sample it, within the thresholds of human perception, you get to something that kind of asymptotically approaches just actually being there, like functionally equivalent of actually being there. And this is where my talk ends or begins to wrap up, and what's going to happen here. So the world, I think, is going to change much faster as a result of VR and AR than I think people fully have internalized and appreciate. And I wanted to take just kind of 3 areas that we're all familiar with: traveling places, being different places, time, history, and then our own memories. And just look at what VR and perfect capture and perfect displays, or even things that are in that realm are going to do. And by the way, I'm not even going to talk about what happens when you can synthesize any imagined reality, right? A world that is all blue, or where gravity works differently, or whatever. It's actually very hard to imagine all of the things that would be possible, but I'm excited about them. So the first, inside 5 years, you're going to be able to put on some goggles and travel to any place on Earth that has been captured with a camera like this, or its descendants, and have the experience of actually being there. And one of the weird things that happens when you are present in another place is your brain lays down memories as if you were in a real place, right? And so I spent a lot of time in VR. After a day spent in with probably an hour or 2 in a particular set we're working on, the next day I have memories of having been in that set. And even more weirdly, right, if you think of how do we dream? What are dreams? Dreams are basically, you take input from the day, stuff that happened to you, and then your brain just riffs on it at night. It's like, man, what if we took it in this direction? Wow, wouldn't that be crazy? Okay, so one of our designers spent a day doing design reviews on a version of Google Earth that we have that works in VR. And in Earth VR, the way you get around is by pointing somewhere and teleporting it. You're like, oh, cool, the Golden Gate Bridge, book, and then the Golden Gate Bridge is in front of you. You look over, like, oh, Mount Tamalpais, book, and then Mount Tamalpais is in front of you. That night in his dreams, he discovered that he had acquired a new ability. He could teleport in his dreams. Right, so his brain was just like, yep, that was the experience of the day, let's go with that, yeah, sure. So you're going to be able to visit the Taj Mahal and Machu Picchu and Paris and any other place that you've ever cared to go, and have the experience of being there, and by the way, the next day, remember having been there. There's also, for me, every person has something that they would really like to go to. A sporting event, a team they love, a musician, a performance. Right now, everyone apparently wants to see the musical Hamilton. And today, you need to spend thousands of dollars, put your body in an aluminum tube with fires on it, spend 6 hours, sitting, wait in a line, to see Hamilton. Okay. Again, disco ball, best seat in the house. All right, whether it's at Hamilton or like the Warriors championship game, right? Imagine, in the future, there'll be some person sitting in the seat next to them will be one of these disco ball cameras, and there will be 10 million people sitting in the seat next to them. And I think it's amazing that we are line of sight to having the technology to take these incredibly valued, scarce experiences and give everyone access to them, right? Give everyone access to them. And there's for things like this, there are just very real constraints. You can only get X tens of thousands of people right into the stadium. That's all you can do, right? And oh, by the way, we haven't even talked about how much it costs and the travel time and so on. And VR has the potential to just level this and give access, give everyone a ticket to the best seat in the house at whatever they care most about. And I think that's pretty cool. And then just thinking about, okay, how are different industries when place no longer matters? How is it gonna work? So most of you, I imagine, will not have bought a house. You know, tip, buying a house today is a pain in the ass. Because what it looks like is you basically meet a real estate agent on Saturday and you drive around and you visit like 10 houses and you hate 9 of them, and then you're excited about one of them, and then, you know, maybe something goes there. There might be 50 houses, right, in a place, right? And I went through this 5 or 6 years ago. Instead, what's going to happen is your real estate agent is going to show up at your house, same time at 9 a.m., but just with 3 VR headsets. And you're like, great, we're going to see 50 homes this morning, and then we're going to go visit the 3 you really like, right? And you're like, great, here's house 1. And you're like, ooh, okay, I don't like the fireplace in the living room. It looks terrible. Next, okay, great. The kitchen island. I love subway tile or whatever, right? And then once you've narrowed the field, you actually go to the ones you really care about. So, right, just for anything where there's actually value to you as a consumer, a purchaser, or whatever, of seeing a bunch of places, well, here's this tool for letting you actually explore the range of options. So that's place, right? And by the way, I've really only been talking about, okay, places that have been captured. There will be these that just work live, right? And you'll be able to put on goggles and just wake up in Times Square and like look around you and hang out with people who are actually there in Times Square right now. You'll have basically these like teleportation portals to 10,000 places all over the world. Some will be one-way, some will be two-way, but it's all going to be interesting. So now imagine for all of those kind of teleportation things and sporting events and so on, you hit record. And now imagine it's like, say, 2035, 20 years from now, 29 years from now. We basically built a time machine, right? If the first premise is, okay, you can experience something, have the experience of actually being there, have memories the next day of being there. Okay, well, we'll be able to come back, and by the way, like, we'll be able to come back to this moment. So like, hello, future self. You know, how's 2035? Hope it's good. Right, we'll be able to come back to this moment and re-experience it as if it was the present. Right? So there we built a teleporter, level in place. We built a time machine, at least, back to the time when we start being capable of recording stuff in VR. And I think even more important than this, right? Okay, historical events, sporting events, space shuttle launches, SpaceX landing on a barge and not blowing up. Those things are cool and important. But the most important stuff that happens in all of our lives, stuff that happens to us, to our families, to our friends, right? Those important moments in our own lives. And with a camera like this, or in time a smaller variant of it, you'll be able to, right, on Christmas morning or a birthday or a wedding, put this on a table or on a tripod at eye height, or whatever, hit record, and just as today we use photos, that basically is memory cues, right? It's like a cue to re-experience something, and our brain goes, oh yeah, I remember that, let me re-simulate. Oh yeah, that was a great moment, that was great. Well, think how much you value your photos of your favorite trips, your families, relatives either here or who have died. But some of the most important things in our lives, right? And it's like, if you think, okay, your house or apartment is on fire, like first you get your family, then you get your pets, then you get your photos. It's actually, we've done polls on this, and that's for many people the order. And so imagine this idea of capturing your own memories, your family's memories. I've actually been doing this. And this is a ridiculous example, but I've been seeing the same barber for 15 years. His name is Moses. Insert joke about hair parts. And so I wanted to, like, I got one last haircut with him, and I was like, okay. And so I brought a camera like this, and I just recorded my last haircut in VR. Not an important moment for me, right? There I am. There's Moses. That's Moses. You can see the Moses sign in the center. But much more importantly, like I have a 3-year-old, I have a 7-month-old, and I realized, like, I will get back from this trip, and the 7-month-old will be doing something different. So these like fleeting moments of life and experience and so on. I've been recording my kids from VR, and so like I just sat down at breakfast with my 3-year-old Henry. Started recording. We had breakfast. And in 20 years, like, I'll be able to go back and have breakfast with him again as a 3-year-old. And by the way, like, he will be able to go back and have breakfast with himself as a 3-year-old, and that, you know, that's kind of crazy. So anyway, that's where this is going, and it's going to happen much faster than people realize, and the implications on pretty much everything that I can think of, I think will be profound. And at Google, what we are focused on, what I am focused on, is really bringing these technologies, bringing these experiences, and making them accessible to everyone. It's why we began, you know, with this crazy thing, rubber bands, cardboards, and Velcro, right? Turns any phone into a kind of makeshift VR viewer. And it's where we're going, right? It's why instead of designing $1 million camera with custom everything, we've chosen to use, right, commodity cameras, but put together in a really clever way. And that's what we'll do again and again and again. On my mission of bringing VR to everyone, I have a gift for everyone. So one of the great things about building products out of cardboard is you can just like give them away to the class. So I have a cardboard for everyone up here. I think it's easier just to come up. I'll pull some out. But please, you know, grab one. I don't know, how many do you have, Steve?
We have plenty.
Okay. Okay. After everyone's gotten one, if you want a second, you come back and get a second. I want to make sure everyone gets one. But anyway, so that's why VR is important right here, presence, why it's happening now, right, the technical curves coming together, a bit about where it's going. And I think what's so exciting for this group is you're going to have not only kind of the context for where it's going and the foresight and the insight, but also the technical skills to actually make much of it happen. And I am beyond excited to see what, as a result of you being you and being smart, but also being in this class at this moment in this time, create with these tools. So that's it. Thank you very much. Thank you so much for joining virtually. Hope you enjoyed this talk. And can we all wave goodbye to our virtual viewer? Bye. Bye. Thanks for joining us. Okay. All right. Yeah! There we go.